So far we have seen what is language and what do we do in the whole field of linguistics. So to answer that question based on what you know by now with all kinds of discussions that we have gone through, language is really a fascinating human capacity, and it's a system in itself. It's not an arbitrary thing. It's natural to us, and humans have specific capacity to speak. That capacity is rule governed, and it happens to us. Okay? All aspects of language, all kinds of rules operating under language, and all aspects, meaning whether it's a phenomena of human mind or whether it's a social phenomena, whether we are looking at rules of sentences, words and sounds, or rules of language use in society. Broadly speaking, e-language and I-language, that is external language or internal language. All kinds of aspects related to language that we study is going to be the domain of the discipline called linguistics. This is what we have seen so far. We started looking at what is it that happens to us when we end up internalizing this whole phenomena without realizing much about it. What is it that, when we say language in a way develops in us, it happens to us. It's just like a child grows incrementally, language develops. This is exactly what we are looking at. We'll look at it in a little bit more details and continue looking at some more aspects of it. So this is the particular scheme of language acquisition, which is every human child is born with this capacity to acquire language. Okay? There are lots of questions related to it. Why do other species not have language? Do they really not have language? Do they not communicate with one another? There could be lots of questions related to this aspect. The moment we start saying every normal human child is born with this capacity to learn a language. To put everything aside right now, all we can say is A, we are not talking about other species, and B, we don't know much about other species. And we cannot blame anyone for that because we don't know much about human language, right? Remember some of the questions that we raised when we were talking about connections between language and human mind? We really don't know which part of human mind actually functions for language. Neuroscientists with lots of efforts kind of know that specialized set of neurons are responsible for different kinds of activities. But we don't know which set of neurons are responsible for language. We don't know whether there is a set of neurons that is responsible for language or not. Okay? So the point is, we don't know much about human language. So if we don't know much about language or communication system of other species, this is not a big surprise. We should, but if we don't, what can we do about it? So all we can say, we don't know much about other species, therefore we are not talking about them. We are not saying that they do not have conclusively. However, some linguists, some people studying language can tell you conclusively that either they don't have, you understand the meaning of they, either other species do not have language, or if they do, that system is very limited in its functioning. Okay? That is like when dogs bark, that has a very limited function. That could be interpreted in couple of ways. It's like traffic signals. When we have the red light, it has a particular interpretation, and when you have a yellow light, it has a particular interpretation, and when you have red light, it has a particular interpretation. So that's also a language in a way, but those are limited in their function. They are similarly, communication system of other species are probably limited in their function. But I would like to take a position that we don't know much about that. Therefore, let's not even worry about that. What we know, or what researchers have tried to understand, is what happens to humans. Okay? And in that we say, this is the beginning point, which is of course hypothetical, as I have told you last time, that human children are born with this capacity. That's point number one. Point number two, that capacity is called language acquisition device, which is not a physical device, it's a hypothetical thing. And this is what we mean when we say we are born with the capacity to acquire language. So we are born with this language acquisition device. This device happens to have two things, two parts of it. One is principles and the other is parameters. And languages are structured around these principles and parameters, which we are going to unfold and see very soon with various different examples. What else happens to this is the set of principles and parameters together is known as universal grammar. And that universal grammar refers to knowledge of all aspects of language of humans. That is, all languages of the world could be hypothetically part of that universal principles of language, which is embedded in language acquisition device. All right? Making sense so far? And then, when a child is born, it functions in a society, and by society here we do not mean a much larger society. Whatever the child interacts with, and that child acquires the language of only that society. We have empirical evidence that a child acquires the language of that society. Based on this empirical fact, what again has been proposed, that the input the child receives from that immediate society functions as a trigger to language acquisition device, which eventually triggers universal grammar and triggers, when we say trigger, we mean triggers the rules of that language, that unfolds such rules, and that unfolding is called acquisition. And then the output is the same language. A child is based on this hypothesis, based on this functioning of, based on this idea of language acquisition, we can say probably a child will be able to acquire all the languages of the world. Can we say that? However, there has to be a condition for that, and that condition is, if I speak Telugu only because I grew up in Telugu speaking area, my immediate society was speaking Telugu, So, if I grew up in a society and my society was speaking all the languages of the world, then I will be speaking all the languages of the world. Only on the basis of that point, it can hypothetically be said that a child will be able to speak all the languages of the world. And this is not a small claim that this hypothesis, this acquisition principle is making. This is a very tall claim. The strength of this tall claim is it's not empirically falsifiable. We cannot falsify this claim. Why? Why can we not falsify this claim?
Because no one has experimented with it, and there's no such area also where it happens.
It's not possible for anyone to show a particular area that, look, this area speaks all the languages of the world. But children living in that area do not speak all the languages of the world. Get this? Therefore, this will not be falsifiable. Okay? And however, on the other hand, we do see that if a child is growing up in areas like Delhi, the child easily speaks Hindi, Punjabi, let's say if you look at more specific areas of Delhi, certain places like Green Park speaks Bangla. So a child growing up in Green Park will easily acquire Hindi, Punjabi, Bangla, and if the child also interacts with English, they will acquire English. So whatever is the languages around, the child has absolutely no difficulty in acquiring such languages. Therefore, the role of immediate society is very significant for what the child acquires. And again, I want to underline and draw your attention to the fact that children do not acquire Tamil, Telugu, Hindi, Punjabi, or at least they don't know that they are acquiring Tamil, Telugu, Hindi, Punjabi. They are acquiring the language that is spoken to them. Okay? And therefore, they speak whatever they speak. All right? Good. Another important aspect of that acquisition is, I think we briefly underlined this thing last time when we were discussing this, that the input is not very sophisticated. You understand this when we say input is not sophisticated? That is, input is not really very clear. Input is not sufficient. Okay? This is what we mean when we say input is fuzzy and limited in its quality and quantity both. It's really not clear. However, when the child starts speaking something, it is perfectly grammatical and infinite. I am going to send you a paper on this particular aspect, and I would like you to take a look at it. It's an easy reading by Ray Jackendorf, which takes you through several steps of language acquisition and how a child incrementally starts developing language. There is a claim in that paper. It's part of a book which is about biological foundation of language. In the time frame of 18 months to 24, the total strength of vocabulary among children grows from 70 to 100 words to 10,000. 70 to 100 at the age of, let's say, 17 or 18 months. By the end of 24, or there is no hard and fast line of 24, 25, 26, the amount is approximately 10,000. Does this not sound surprising? So, and that he brings as an evidence that the output through different stages, and when we move to a particular stage, really becomes infinite. And then it keeps growing and growing to the extent that we don't even know how much we know, how many things we know about language. And then when a child starts speaking, we continue and never stop. That's the meaning of infinite. Grammatical simply means, what's the meaning of grammatical here? Can someone say? Can someone tell? What's the meaning of the word grammatical that you in general understand? Anybody?
Proper structure for sentences.
Proper structure for sentences. Good words, right? Yes. Grammatical here also refers to, you are right, proper structure. But then we need to know what is that proper structure. Grammatical here also means acceptable. That is, an acceptable is commonly agreed between people. So when a child says something, after a certain point, we do not say that we don't understand. Okay? And that is also grammatical in the sense that at the level of sound, what happens is, see, if there is a word which is like, okay, see this thing? This is a word like papa. Through these kinds of things, what children figure out, and this is what refers to underlying patterns, is this pattern, that a word requires a consonant, a vowel, a consonant and a vowel. Okay? You will not find any child saying things like what's this word? Anybody? You don't know. Can you say this word at least? No. Do you know why you cannot say this word? Does not have a vowel. Right? This word does not have a vowel. Now, what I want to tell you is, children do not learn, of course they learn papa, but what they are learning is not individual words. What they are figuring out is the underlying pattern of word formation. That is, and again, this happens on the basis of this limited input. As I have told you just now, that until the age of 18 months, whatever a child goes through has only a limited vocabulary of, let's say, 15 to 20 to 30 to 70 words. It jumps exponentially at a particular stage during a particular time frame. Now, that gymnastics is not that important. What is important is, what happens is this. This is cleared, that you cannot have a word which does not have a vowel. Okay? What the child also figures out, that not every word is going to be consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. That is, what a child figures out, that there are going to be words which are going to be like this, where you may have 2 consonants as a cluster in the beginning, the child also figures out that at times you may have 2 consonants as a cluster somewhere in the middle of a sentence, and then probably we may have a cluster at the end of it too. However, again, based on the same input, which is for every child of every language, of every place on this planet, input remains fuzzy and limited. But on the basis of the same thing, a child figures out that probably the language that is being spoken around me does not allow a cluster. The example that I was trying to give you last time was from Punjabi, that Punjabi speaking children who acquire Punjabi or are growing up in Punjabi speaking areas try to simplify clusters even from the languages which may have clusters, and therefore words like school becomes sakul for them, or they end up saying sakul. Words like scooter becomes scooter. Get it? So they have figured it out. Get this point? That's what I am trying to say. That the input is limited, fuzzy, output is grammatical. So when a child says the word like papa, it's a perfectly grammatically acceptable pattern of words that the child is producing. Right now we are talking about pattern of grammaticality at the level of word, but the similar kinds of patterns are visible at every stage. Okay? Grammatical also means scooter, and this is important for me to underline to you here, that when a Punjabi speaking child says scooter, this is a grammatical pattern for them. Is this making sense to you? Why is this a grammatical pattern for them? Because
it is acceptable in this.
it's acceptable pattern for them. Get it? Therefore, grammatical does not refer to what I think is right. Grammatical also refers to acceptable patterns. And then there are overlaps between grammaticality and acceptability, which we will get to some other time. Okay? Along with the paper from Ray Jackendoff, which you should read, which is a nice reading, you should be done. It's a very interesting reading as well. You won't stop reading it if you are interested in looking at how development takes place. I'll also send you the book that has these things in it. Lillian Hegman's book on government and binding theory, which is about principles and parameters. Okay, I didn't find it on the library website, and if it is available, it was showing one copy, but it must be somewhere. But I'll send you the electronic copy. So please keep that copy, and not only just keep that, keep reading that as well. Okay, all right. Now, so moving ahead from here, we have seen these things in the sense that language learning is really not very complicated for children. It happens normally. It happens on its own. It does not take much of effort. That's exactly what we mean by language learning with child's play. And what I do want you to understand, that there are some key words that are important here. Key word is effortlessly. There is no effort that is being put in it. Okay? It happens without specific instruction. Okay? These are the two key points in language learning. When a child is learning a language effortlessly, without any instruction, based on limited input from the environment, output is infinite and grammatical. The role of human mind, that is language acquisition device, that is universal grammar and its components as principles and parameters, are responsible for this. Before this theory, before these principles came into existence, people did not pay proper attention to the role of human mind in understanding language, in acquiring language. All right? Okay. This is why we say language learning is a special type of cognitive ability. This is the things that we have discussed, that we learn other kinds of things like singing, swimming, dancing, flying, and various other things when we are grown up. Therefore, there is a clear distinction between language and everything else, and on the basis of that we say language as a specific, special purpose cognitive ability. All right? Just now what I told you, people did not pay much attention in the acquisition of language, and particularly the role of human mind in it. So they simply believed that we learn through practice, and this is referred as stimulus and response. So you hear something, that was called stimulus, and when you respond to that, learning takes place. So a child listens to the word papa and it says papa. It finds out kaka, says kaka. Mama says mama. Keep saying these things, you learn this. Now, we are not trying to laugh at this thing. We are only saying that this was based on limited observations. This was based on not much of effort was put into understanding language, and the simple thing which was not looked at was how is this that output is not equivalent to input, where the proposal from the theory would say the output will be equivalent to input, which is not true. At the age of 5 and 6, you see the output is infinite. Probably a child would not have gone through that much of input in 5 years of age, 4 years of age. So how is that possible? This was not paid much attention to. And they believe that it's a matter of habit formation, that you keep repeating things, you hear things, and therefore you learn it. Even now, when you ask people not lot, but in a simple way, how do you think we learn language? Lot of things people would say without knowing the term behaviorism or stimulus and response. Whatever people are going to tell you are going to be around these things, that we listen to things, we repeat things, we learn from our parents, we learn from people around us. See, huge part of that is true. It's not that everything that they are saying is not true. The only thing that people were not paying attention in this was the role of human mind in it. And therefore, when people started looking at the role of human mind, that is called innateness hypothesis, where you have seen how it works, and then it becomes really a critical thing. And therefore, you must have I can't say heard, but you must have studied that human mind is different from minds of other species. One of the ways in which it is very different is language, that we don't know much about. That is the part of human mind responsible for language learning, that is, which part of it is responsible for language learning, is something that we don't know. Now, I want to come to this last part. We have already covered most of it. So see, deducting the rules, that is, deducting abstract patterns from the available input, right, is actually what we mean by language acquisition. That is, I am listening to words, and of course I am producing physical words like papa, mama, and cha-cha, and all other words. However, what my mind is actually doing is deducing abstract principles of word formation. The capacity to do so is called generative capacity. Get this thing? So you are going to hear this word, you are going to read these words in many chapters when you look at the book, you are going to find this word generative. And it's important to understand, generative simply means the capacity to deduce, to deduct rules, and then the ability to produce new things on the basis of those rules. Okay? So, if we have other words like of this pattern, so what we know is this pattern, that is, it's an acceptable pattern of word formation, which is CV, CV. That's a very regular and productive pattern. Once we have acquired that, then we can come up with n number of words through this thing. Every word, every sound that you are going to fit into this, every set of sounds that are going to fit here are going to be grammatical and acceptable pattern, may not be in one language, but definitely in some other language. So can you come up with a word on the pattern of this, which you may not have heard so far? You are smart engineers. Do you understand my question? So on the basis of this pattern, can you come up with a word which you think you may not have heard so far?
Zag zag. Exe exe.
So that will be?
Zag zag.
Say it loudly. I didn't hear that.
Zag zag.
So we remember, we are not talking about how we write it. We are talking about how we say it. So the word will be
Zag zag.
zaza, jaja. Have you not heard this word before? Jaja. We may not be writing it with X-A, but the word ja means go, and jaja means something of that sort, right? We have heard that word. You can do much better than that. Try it. Something that you think we may not have heard. Now, let me keep telling you while you are working on this, and the moment you come up with that, raise your hands, and I want to get that word. So all I am trying to say that even though you have not heard that word, okay, even though that word does not mean anything, that's an acceptable word. Okay, and it's likely that that word will acquire some meaning someday. Not necessarily it will acquire, but it's a possibility that will acquire some meaning someday. Okay. Also, so that part of word formation tells you that association between the meaning and a word is also not really that important. It's just a coincidence that rest of the words that we know have association between the word, that is a product of this pattern, or this pattern, or this pattern, or any other pattern, and what it refers to. I'm talking about something where I need your attention. I hope you understand this thing, that it is a coincidence that connection exists in lot of them. At the same time, it is also possible that for lot of such words this connection does not exist, that is, there is no object associated with those words. However, they are possible words simply because they follow a particular pattern. However, some sounds that you may be familiar with, if they come out of unacceptable pattern, that is neither going to be acceptable as a word, and therefore it is almost negligible as a possibility that that will acquire any kind of association with any object or that as a word. I hope this is making sense to you. Now, I am giving you this example to indicate what I mean by generative capacity. What I mean by the word generative. The word generative simply means the capacity to deduce, to deduct rules, the capacity to understand patterns, and the ability to use that pattern for new words. Okay? And this is the capacity that is responsible for infiniteness of what we do as language. Okay? And that is the capacity which makes distinction between innateness hypothesis and behaviorism. That in behaviorism that capacity was missing, that link was missing. I mean, not that people would not learn language the way that we are learning. People were learning language the same way. It's just that we did not understand. We didn't have things to say that we are saying about now. Okay? People were learning language the same way. It really didn't, people didn't care whether you call it behaviorism or innateness. They were learning the same way ever since. It's just that we didn't know that how does this happen that we have this infinite capacity to come up with words. The only thing that innateness hypothesis has done is it helps us understand that it's our generative capacity that is responsible for any word, any sentence that we may be speaking. In fact, we can also come up with words that may not have any meaning, but may be acceptable pattern, maybe acceptable word, right? I hope this generative capacity is clear to you. We'll be giving lots of examples of such things. You didn't come up with a word of that sort? It's okay if you didn't come up with that word. Work on that word, okay? Which you may not have heard. And that doesn't have to be from English or Hindi. That could be from any language, okay? All right. And this capacity develops miraculously. I have just given you an example of 18 months to 24 months. I am going to send you a paper, you can see that. So the important claim is this generative capacity miraculously develops. This is what we mean when we say language happens to us, language develops in us. That is, the capacity to deduct rules is the meaning of language learning, and this is the capacity which is responsible for infiniteness. I have told you about the words like effortless and other things. You can see in the second point, this process, that is this process of deducting rules is so fast, so effortless that it requires no instruction. This generative capacity recognizes patterns, develops rules, and generates perfect system called language. This is exactly what I have been underlining so far, and I'll be giving you more and more examples of these things and these things. I'm going to come to this pattern very soon when we have looked at sounds. So maybe tomorrow we will look at sound systems. Now, this whole body of rules, okay, this whole capacity that we know as generative capacity results into the bulk of things, which is called knowledge of language. And knowledge of language is under inverted quotes, which means knowledge of, when we say knowledge of language in the field of study of language, we do not mean the knowledge of Tamil, Malayalam, English or French. We mean the knowledge of these rules, the knowledge of rules that are responsible for infiniteness. Get it? And that rule refers, that rule also means that, see, we know all those rules. That is, when you were learning words as a child, you had also figured out this thing. I had figured out these things. Every child, everybody figures out these things. But if someone tells us, how did we start learning words? It will not be possible for us to tell them, the first I figured out CV pattern. In fact, we cannot even list all the sounds, forget about abstract rules. So, knowledge of language has this specific thing, which is, of course, it's an outcome of universal grammar, universal principles, parameters and all those things, but this is the specific thing that we need to know about it. It's a specific set of rules that we have internalized long time ago. That is, we know all such rules, but we don't know that we know them. Okay? If we didn't know those rules, then we won't be speaking. Get it? But I don't know all those rules. I mean, I don't know that I know all of them. It's impossible for any human being to list them. That is also part of generative capacity. That is exactly what we mean by generative capacity. Look at the second point, third point rather, here. Does this sound okay to you? Do you agree with this? That these underlying rules help generative mechanism of a native speaker speak unheard of sentences and enable them separate grammatical sentences from ungrammatical ones. Right? So if someone makes any error anywhere, right, and I'm not giving you any example because I want to keep it open for all the languages. So check with your language. Someone makes an error. How long does it take for you to figure out that an error has taken place? So Sandeep, right? And as I have asked you, many of you understand Hindi, right? So and I'm giving you a Hindi example because I speak and I understand Hindi. So if I say Sandeep jati hai, that a good sentence? No. An error has occurred. How long did it take you to figure this out? Instantaneously we do that, right? Now, it will be unfair to a lot of people if I ask this question to a lot of people, so what is this error about? So what's wrong with this sentence? That could be an unfair question, because I do not expect every speaker of language to understand significance of grammatical agreement in terms of gender. That's not important. But the fact that an error has occurred takes no time. That's a result of generative capacity. That is, to separate grammatical ones from ungrammatical sentences within no time. Okay? And even if someone is speaking very fast, you keep paying attention to that. If that person keeps making, if there are patterns that are not acceptable, and someone is saying, you immediately figure out that this person is not a speaker of the language that he is speaking. That is at least not a native speaker of that language. I'll talk to you about native speakers and what we mean by non-native speakers and native speakers some other time. Right now, I want you to understand these points that I have highlighted for you, and also, okay, I'll come to that in a moment. So, see, look at the first point here. I know we are running out of time. I'll stop in a couple of minutes. Linguistic computation and human cognition uses socio-culturally grounded context. Now there are three phrases here: linguistic computation, human cognition, and socio-culturally grounded context. These are not complicated things. I just want you to understand. Linguistic computation simply means activating generative mechanism. That is how we come up with sentences, how we speak something. That is linguistic computation, which is part of human cognition. That is, all that computation takes place here. And we are not even aware of that computation when it is going on, because at every single point, nobody knows what you are going to say next. That is, I don't have a sentence for the next moment. I come up with this sentence instantaneously. Okay? So these two things have great coordination between them: human cognition and linguistic computation. However, what is important for someone to be able to speak properly and to function in society with the explicit knowledge of e-language is not just these things, but also socio-culturally grounded contexts. That is, what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. Remember the other day I asked you the example of how do we say when someone dies? There are different ways of saying things. One is acceptable, the other may not be. One may be appropriate, the other may not be appropriate. Right? So what is appropriate is acceptable, what is not appropriate is not acceptable. Now, not necessarily what is not appropriate is ungrammatical. Get it? What may not be appropriate, may not be acceptable, but may be grammatical. So grammaticality is not the only condition for acceptability and appropriateness. When we put the coordination between grammaticality, acceptability and appropriateness, that's part of what we know as socio-culturally grounded context. My point here is, first two parts, linguistic computation and human cognition, refers to I-language. Socio-culturally grounded context refers to e-language. Now, my point here is both are part of generative mechanism. That is, we do not learn about appropriateness and connection between grammaticality, acceptability and appropriateness separately. They come together. Get this point? Should not be very difficult. Therefore, all of them are part of generative mechanism. All right? And the knowledge of language that grows in human mind is not an outcome of stimulus response that I just told you. That is not part of behaviorism. Rather, it is part of generative apparatus as a special kind of cognitive ability. Okay? And third point is not really that important for us. I mean, it's an important part, that knowledge of language has got serious consequences for learning and teaching, where we need to understand what knowledge of language actually guarantees is that continuum. That why it's difficult to name a language, right, which is part of external language. Remember the continuum that we have talked about? Knowledge of language that continuum is embedded in knowledge of language. So, names of languages as external manifestations are our creations. What we know is just language. Okay? I stop here and we begin talking about sounds tomorrow.